Good evening, everyone, and welcome to lesson number 6, the very last class of our 6-week course, Beyond Right, Beyond Presumption, Presume Every Person's Goodness. So the topic for tonight is a very, very interesting topic and very relevant. One of the issues that is perhaps the most hotly debated in the times that we live in today, which is about human nature. Are people inherently good or bad? The answer to the question is not only relevant from a philosophical perspective, but it's relevant from a legal perspective. Because as we have been discussing this entire course, values shapes the law. So what value does, how we view whether people are inherently good or bad is going to really shape the way that we as a society make laws. We're going to begin tonight's class with a question. Do you have any conscious or subconscious biases? Now, you don't have to answer because I think we all know the answer to the question that, of course we do, right? We absolutely do. Every person here, to one degree or another, in one manner or another, absolutely has biases which they take within them into their life, which shape and color the way that they view people and experiences. Now, we are going to give two definitions, two different types of biases, and we're going to begin with text number 1A. Sandy, would you like to read text number 1A?
Could I go on the next one? Sorry, I just got home. And
all right, David, go for text number 1A.
Myself. Prejudice in favor of or against one thing, person, or group compared with another, usually in a way considered to be unfair.
Okay.
Sorry, that's the definition of bias.
So here we have one definition of what it means to have a prejudicial bias. David, if you could read text number 1B, we have another definition of a bias.
An inclination to temperament or outlook, especially personal and sometimes unreasoned judgments.
So if you could take maybe 30 seconds, look at text number 1A, look at text number 1B, and can you spot the difference? Both of them give us a definition of what it means to have a bias, but there's something slightly different, and it's important that we tease out this point to serve as the foundation of the rest of the class. So give yourself 30 seconds or so to look at 1A, 1B, and tell me if you could find a difference.
I don't see a difference.
I will suggest the difference, but first I want to see if anyone has able to come up with it on their own.
Oh, sorry.
Any thoughts, David, on what the difference is?
I mean, the first has to do with sort of choices between things, maybe, and the second has to do with, well, like it says, a temperament. So like a personality trait. I mean, they both might result in the same kind of thing, and they both result in a choice. But one, it's sort of a different origin.
So David is just about there. The difference between these two definitions is, while they both acknowledge that for all intents and purposes, we all go through life with particular biases, there may be different ways that we apply the bias, and the difference is consistency. In definition number 1, it's not a bias that we apply equally across the board. It's a bias that applies maybe to certain people in certain circumstances and in certain experiences of life. So it's a bias that we have that kicks into gear and colors the way we look at things, but it is not applied consistently, equally, or across the board. It's a bias that rears its ugly head under certain particular circumstances and not in others. The second definition of bias is one where a person has a particular bias. It could be a result of a character, that's your personality, and you view life, everything in it, all circumstances, all situations, all places, through the lens of this bias. So that's the difference. Do you consistently apply the bias amongst all circumstances, or do you selectively apply the bias to different circumstances? Now let's try to understand these two differences a little bit further. And we'll begin with the first type of bias, which is the one that is applied inconsistently. And we'll look at exercise 6.2 on page 168. The following chart lists 4 fairly common personal lapses, negative occurrences. It asks us how we interpret them when they happen to us and how we interpret them when they happen to others. Fill in the chart with your own interpretation or select some of the options provided below the chart. Now, you don't have to fill it in exactly if you don't want to, but I think you might get the point already of this exercise. Would you agree or disagree that you apply the rules differently with yourself versus with other people? People have a tendency to judge themselves very favorably. Let's say you were late to an important event, meeting, circumstance, maybe a wedding. What would you say? I'm sorry, I had a very difficult day, right? There was a lot of traffic, right? My boss gave me a ton of extra work. You would justify the reason that you were late. You would not say that you are a person who you procrastinate, you're lazy. You would not say something like that. You would view yourself and say, listen, I was stressed. It was a hard day. Things were challenging. There was tons of traffic, and that's why I'm late. But I'm a good guy. I'm not a bad guy. However, another person, you might say, how inconsiderate, how rude, right? A person makes a wedding and you show up late, right? We have a natural tendency to judge ourselves favorably, but to judge other people negatively, right? We find excuses for ourselves. We are innocent, while the other person, for some reason, doing exactly the same thing is guilty, right? This is a natural inconsistency. This is a bias that we have towards ourselves, which we don't apply to other people. How do we look at ourselves? We say, we are good people. Are we perfect? No, of course we're not perfect. We have minor flaws, but we could totally tweak those at any other time. Other people, we tend to view, that person is seriously flawed. That person is damaged goods. That person is not a good guy. They need to get their act together. So we have a personal cognitive bias. There is a self-love that we have, which colors our judgment, how we look at other people. For others, we don't have the same acceptance of love. Their imperfections are open, clear, and obvious to all. So the difference is how you look at yourself versus other people. Another person, if I'm late, oh, it was unexpected traffic, it's not my fault. I'm a very on-time person. I'm very punctual. When it comes to other people, oh, they're irresponsible. That's why they are late. Now, all things, right, are not equal. Towards myself, I have an underlying love. It's an established fact that I'm a good person. When it comes to other people, I'm free of this bias, right? The offense is the only fact that I have. In other words, when you look at yourself, you are biased. You're biased because you love yourself. Therefore, you do not judge people. You do not judge yourself harshly. When it comes to other people, all that we may see of them is whatever negative behavior that they're presenting. We don't see the struggles, we don't see the challenges, we don't see any of the other elements even of their personality, and we're quick to judge, and often judging in a very negative light. However, I have good news. It does not have to be this way. We don't have to look at people this way. We don't have to be so biased towards ourselves and then ultimately negative to other people. What could you do? We could apply the second level of bias. where we have a consistent lens, a biased lens, where which we look at the entirety of the world and use the same biased lens that we look at ourselves, we could use that lens to looking at other people. The same positive judgment that you place on your own negative actions, it's not your fault, you're really a good guy, there was a lot of traffic, it was someone else's fault, and so on and so forth. We can apply that exact same lens for other people. A person's late, we don't say that they were irresponsible. Not at all. We have the ability to see other people as beautiful people who have not yet reached perfection, just as we are beautiful people who have not yet reached perfection. So we could extend this self-bias to everyone. Those who are generally good, or those we don't know, we can judge them favorably until proven otherwise. Not 100% sure what this seesaw is supposed to mean, but it's a very nice and artistic design, that's for sure. So what does Judaism teach? Judaism teaches that you actually should be biased, and you should have the same love and acceptance and understanding for other people as you have for yourself, which is where this mitzvah comes in. Love your fellow like yourself. The same way you love yourself, the same bias you have to yourself, apply it to other people. Let's go to text number 2a and text number 2b. Sander, are you up for it?
Yes, I'm good. Thank you. 2a is the righteous judgment. You shall judge your fellow with righteousness.
Right, so here we have a biblical verse that tells us how should we view other people. Our view of other people should be they're righteous. That should be our natural way of looking at people. And now the Sefer HaChinuch will explain this a little bit, Sandy.
Okay, giving a positive spin. Included in this commandment is the instruction to each individual to judge their fellow favorably and to deliberately interpret their conduct and statements in a positive light. Through judging others favorably, we will foster peace and harmony among people as a result of eliminating mutual suspicion.
So the Chinuch does not tell us that we should be naive and reckless. The Chinuch doesn't say that if a person is charging at us with a big knife over their head, that we should not just say, oh, this person is probably about to carve a turkey, which happens to be sitting on my shoulder or something like that. We can't make such an assumption. That's not something that's going to work. What does the Chinuch mean? The Chinuch means that in normal everyday circumstances in life, the same bias that you place on yourself by judging yourself favorably, judge other people exactly in the same light. Now, why should we do this? Why should we judge people favorably? Is it true? Is it accurate? Are people good? Well, let's look at what some of the biggest, psychologists and philosophers have said over the years. Let's see, what is this slide here? All right. What is our natural human state? Do we deserve to be judged favorably? So we're going to begin with Freud. Right? What does Freud have to say? Freud says people, we're very messed up. Narcissistic, selfish, cruel, violent, aggressive. These are the fundamental nature of the human being, right? We're not in good shape. Takes a lot of work to get us into good shape. Let's go to text number 3 and see what Freud has to say. Right, Mitchell, Freudian scholar, would you like to read text number 3?
Okay. Man is a wolf to man. Sigmund Freud's civilization and its discontents. Men are not gentle creatures who want to be loved and who are the most.
Mitchell, you muted yourself.
The wrong button. Okay. Men are not gentle creatures who want to be loved and who at the most can defend themselves if they are attacked. They are, on the contrary, creatures among those instinctual endowments is to be reckoned a powerful share of aggressiveness. Man is a wolf to man, who, in the face of all his experience of life and of history, will have the courage to dispute this assertion.
So Freud says, look at history, and what will you see? How should a man view their fellow man? The same way you would view a wolf coming at you, right? That and Freud says this is what history has borne us out, right? Our instinct of nature is to be aggressive. Freud is not judging people favorably, and from the perspective of Freud, he has very good reason to say this. Now, there are other scholars who maintain that this is actually not the case, that human beings are actually pretty good and pretty nice. We're civil, right? We are socialized creatures. Let's go to text number 4 to Carl Rogers. David, would you like to read?
Sure. One of the most revolutionary concepts to grow out of our clinical experience is the growing recognition that the innermost core of man's nature, the deepest layers of his personality, the base of his animal nature, is positive in nature. It's basically socialized, forward-moving, rational, and realistic.
That's a very beautiful thing that Carl Rogers says. He says that people, we are basically socialized people. That means we like to live in societies and communities with people and interact with them in a normal way. We're forward-moving, we're rational, we're realistic. These are all beautiful commentaries. Carl Rogers says our basic human nature is positive. This past week, my son Fischl was in a camp, was in a bike camp. So this is a camp of a group of people, primarily volunteers, who teach kids to learn how to ride their bike. I tried to teach Fischl how to ride his bike. It was a disaster. And this was a wonderful group of people, kind, sensitive, caring, who taught Fischl how to ride a bike in the week in the most beautiful way. And it, you interact with people, it stores your belief in humanity. As Carl Rogers says, you look at people, you know what? Our basic human nature is positive. Now, what does Judaism have to say? Are we a wolf? Are we aggressive? Are we selfish? Are we narcissistic? Or are we more, as Carl Rogers would say, we're pretty positive, right? We like to work with people. We want to function in community. We're realistic, right? We want to make progress. We like to advance society. Which of the two is more accurate? Now, from a Torah perspective, neither of them are accurate, right? What do we mean by that? The Torah actually says we can go much further and deeper into a person. Does a person have some animalistic tendencies to be selfish, to be aggressive? Yes, a person has that, but that does not define a person. That's not their core. From the perspective of Carl Rogers, people are basically good and we want to work with each other to improve society. Is that true? Yeah, there's some truth to that. As people, we do like to function in that way. But does that represent the deepest and most essential definition of who we are as people? The Torah says, absolutely not. The core of the human being is a soul which is godly, a soul which is pure, much deeper than any of these two possible definitions. Let's go to text number 7 from the Siddur. Sandy, would you like to read text number 7?
Okay, let me get to it.
We will be skipping around a little bit, some of the text. We'll get back to these earlier on.
Okay. Okay, the pure soul. Am I unmuted?
Yeah, we hear you.
Oh, okay. My God, the soul that you have placed in me is pure. You created it. You formed it. You breathed it into me, and you preserve it within me.
So what is the belief in the positivity of human nature based on? It is based on the idea that we possess a divine soul, and that is in fact the core of identity, and is completely pure. How does this make a difference? This makes a difference because a person can choose to act and behave in a particular way. A person can act and behave in the style of Freud, or not necessarily Freud behaved. I mean, how Freud describes and imagines human beings to behave. You could act that way. Or you could act the way that Carl Rogers describes people acting. At the end of the day, that's just behavior. That's just action, and there may be many different things that are motivating it, but your actions do not necessarily define who you are. Your core identity is a divine soul, and that is something which is completely pure and transcends any particular actions that a person might do on any particular day, and a person cannot be defined by the actions that they might do, whether positive or negative, on any particular given day. Now, if this is the case, that we possess a divine soul, which is the core of identity and it's pure, then why do we sin? How is it possible that we ever can make a mistake? How would jealousy, anger, and any other various sin ever happen if we're that divine soul and if we're that pure? So here we go to text number 8. I'll read text number 8, a little short text here. The Talmud says, people only transgress when they are overcome by a spirit of foolishness. What does that mean? Yes, we may transgress, but that doesn't mean we're bad people. That doesn't mean we're selfish and narcissistic, right? The transgression isn't natural to us. Again, it doesn't define us. It's not our core. Why do we sin sometimes? Because life sometimes can be challenging. Life sometimes can be difficult. We may face various obstacles and we may make the wrong choice, but that does not define us. Life is not easy. There are bumps along the road. There are challenges that are presented to us from a spiritual perspective, from a theological perspective, from a social perspective, from a religious perspective. We don't always succeed. Right? We don't always succeed. Sometimes there's a challenge and we may fail, but that failure does not define us. What defines us? Our godly soul, our divine soul, which is absolutely pure. Because of the fact that our true, real core identity is that pure divine soul, therefore the Torah commands us. The Torah says, you must see other people as manifestations of a divine soul and a pure soul, and you have to treat people as if they are manifestations of that divine soul and that pure soul. And this is something that is actually translated into Jewish law. The idea that at a core, a person is a divine and pure soul, which transcends their actions, has many, many implications in Jewish law, where we look often beyond the actions of the person, perhaps through the action of the person, and try to view them from the perspective of their soul. What do we call this in Judaism? We give people a presumption of righteousness. Are you familiar with a similar line that might apply to a legal system that you might be familiar with? Similar to presumption of righteousness. What were you going to say, David?
In criminal law, there is a presumption of innocence until proven guilty.
Very good. So David tells us that in the secular legal system, we have something that's called the presumption of innocence. How does the presumption of innocence in a court of law until proven guilty compare with the idea of a presumption of righteousness? So first, let's get the details on what the presumption of innocence is all about. That is text number 5. We're going to go back to text number 5, and we will have our legal scholar read that. David, please. Text number 5, page 172.
The law presumes the defendant to be innocent of the charge or all the charges against him or her. This presumption of innocence is a rule of law that compels you to find the defendant not guilty unless and until the Commonwealth produces evidence from whatever source that proves that the defendant is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. This burden of proof never shifts. The defendant is not required to call any witnesses or produce any evidence, since he or she is presumed to be innocent. The presumption of innocence stays with the defendant unless and until the evidence convinces you unanimously as a jury that the defendant is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. It requires you to find the defendant not guilty unless his or her guilt has been proven or proved beyond a reasonable doubt.
We see from this text that the concept of a presumption of innocence and the presumption of righteousness as found in Jewish law are not related or comparable at all. Because in a secular court, when we say presumption of innocence, we do not mean presumption of being wonderful, being presumption of being fantastic, not at all. All we are saying is, you have not proven this person to be guilty. From a secular perspective, the presumption of innocence means you are not guilty until you're proven guilty. But it doesn't go beyond that at all. What does the Jewish law say? You're actually righteous. Not just that you're not guilty, not just that we don't have the goods, we don't have the evidence against you. We actually view you as being righteous. That's a tremendous difference. Why do we have this presumption? Because as we mentioned earlier, from a Jewish perspective, the core identity of every being is their divine soul, which is holy and pure. Therefore, we literally view people not innocent, but actually righteous. There's a 16th century halachic authority, was known as the Maharshdam, and he makes a fascinating comment to try to get us to appreciate what it means that Jewish law views people as actually being righteous. And he gives a fascinating example based on the laws and the principles of kosher. So when we talk about a cow, is a cow a kosher animal? Yes, a cow is a kosher animal. However, in order for us to actually be allowed to eat that cow, there are many steps that have to take place. Number one, the cow has to be kosher slaughtered properly by a person who is known as a shochet, a kosher ritual slaughterer. Once the animal is slaughtered, is the animal able to be eaten? Not yet. You have to, of course, soak and salt it. You have to get rid of the blood. But in addition to that, you have to make sure that the animal is healthy. If the animal is not healthy, it may be considered treif, not kosher, unacceptable, and we would not be able to eat it. The Jewish law gives, I may be mistaken, but offhand, I believe 18 different parts of the animal that need to be looked at, because in any one of those 18 parts of the animal, there can be some type of illness or some type of injury that would prevent the animal from being kosher. However, on a practical level, there is only one that we look at, and that are the lungs. Because the lungs is the part of the animal that is most likely to have an issue, so therefore we look at the lungs. All of the other elements we do not look at. Why? We presume that the animal is kosher, right? That is the legal presumption, the legal status, without checking, without investigating, without looking. We say absolutely 100% that is a kosher animal. Right? So in the same sense that we view people as righteous without necessarily the evidence, the same thing for kosher. Let's go to text number 6. Mitchell, could you read text number 6, please?
Presumption of righteousness. It is clear and established we are all presumed to be righteous. This is analogous to presumptions we use regarding the kosher status of animals. As long as an animal is alive, it is forbidden for consumption, and it is presumed to remain in the state until we can ascertain that it has been slaughtered properly. Once the animal has been slaughtered properly, it is then presumed to be kosher, unless it is clearly proven to be non-kosher due to a severe physical defect. Similarly, God created each of us upright and honest by nature. People retain this presumption of righteousness unless it has been clearly proven that they have chosen to veer from the way of truth and righteousness and follow a deceitful and crooked path.
So the Maharshdam makes such a fascinating comparison. He says you kosher slaughter an animal and you don't look at its stomach, you don't look at any other issues. The animal could be not kosher, but what do? We say if there's no red flag, if there's nothing obvious that's sticking out, the animal is 100% kosher. How kosher is it? It's so kosher that you could serve it as brisket at the Mashiach Suda in the shul sponsored by Mitchell and Arlene. That's how kosher it is. You didn't investigate. You didn't look at it. Yet it has a status of a presumption of innocence. A presumption of being kosher. The Majdam says that is how we look at Jewish people, and perhaps even all people. How do we look at them? Kosher, righteous. Even though you didn't investigate to discover every one of their flaws, without concrete knowledge of those flaws, we view people not as neutral, not as innocent, but actually as righteous. Absolutely as righteous. And this is going to affect so many issues of Jewish law. We're going to cover 4 very interesting cases right now. Yes, Mitchell.
What about once they slaughter the animal, they find the lung has a tumor or something? You don't know that at first.
So the lung is the only part of the animal that has to be checked. Even though if there are a problem in many of the other parts of the animal, it will render the animal non-kosher. We just assume that it's kosher. The lungs, because of the frequency of health issues, therefore we actually tackle the lungs. We actually do look at the lungs. All right, we are going to talk about the fascinating case of the unknown shochet, right? The unknown ritual slaughterer. What's the background? The laws of kosher slaughter are complex. It takes a serious amount of learning and takes a serious amount of skill to be ordained, so to speak, as a ritual slaughterer. So in order to qualify, right, for kosher slaughter, you have to have knowledge of the laws and you have to be well trained in the technique. Let's look at text number 9. Sandy, you want to read text number 9 and see what the Rambam says about knowing how to kosher slaughter animals?
Sure. A Jew who doesn't know the law of
Shechita, that's kosher slaughter.
Yeah, I have one though.
may not slaughter. Any meat slaughter by such a person is forbidden for consumption. Even a person who knows the law of kosher slaughter should not slaughter alone before practicing many times under the supervision of an expert scholar and achieving proficiency in the technique. Only a person who is well versed in the law of Shechita and has practiced under expert supervision until achieving proficiency is considered a qualified expert.
So Mitchell, let's say you would like to have a second career as a kosher slaughterer. You don't just show up to the kosher plant and they give you a knife and some goggles and say, go at it. You need training. You need to study for a long time. There's serious tests. You need to master the physical techniques. You graduate from the program, then you are a kosher slaughterer. What if an unknown man came to town and slaughtered some animals? You walk into the kosher slaughterhouse and you see a person there, you never saw him before. He's got the knife in hand, he's slaughtering the animals, but you have no clue who the person is. So what are you gonna do? You're gonna ask him, can I see some ID, please? Right? Can you show me your qualifications? How do I know that you should be doing this job? However, before you get to him, the person left through a different entrance. You never see the person again. Is the meat kosher or not? Right? Is steak and scotch still on, or is it going to be canceled due to the lack of knowledge of who the slaughterer was? Here we go to text number 10. David, would you like to read text number 10, please?
Sure. If the Jew came and slaughtered an animal and left before we were able to determine whether or not he was a proficient practitioner, the meat may be consumed. The rationale for this law is that the majority of slaughter practitioners are experts.
Did you follow that law here that we just said in the Rambam? We can assume that he's qualified. We never saw the person before. No idea who the person is, whether he had training, whether he had no training. We are just going to assume that he slaughtered the animal kosherly and properly. Why? I'll get you in a second. Why? Because we have a presumption that most people who slaughter animals, right, will do it correctly. By that very definition, what does that mean? there is a percentage of people who will not do it properly. I don't know what the number is, but let's make up an easy number, right? 85% of people who kosher slaughter animals do it correctly, 15% don't. So we're saying it's kosher. Would you go to a kosher restaurant if someone told you 85% of the food in this restaurant is kosher, 15% is not? How does this make any sense? All right, Mitchell, you had your hand raised. Unmute yourself and go for it.
Yes, then why is there such a problem with you can't have this hashgacha versus that hashgacha? Montreal one, Shore Bor is okay. The Chabad one is all right. Empire is not.
Empire is a wonderful hechsher, and anyone who eats Empire can eat it with pride that they're fulfilling the mitzvah of kosher in a most beautiful and special way. There are two different reasons why a person might not want to eat from a particular kosher certification. One is because they know for a fact that a particular kosher certification is not reliable. Not guessing, not assuming. We know for a fact that their standards are not up to par. That's one reason. There's a second reason why a person might not eat eat from a particular kosher certification, not because, God forbid, that they're casting any doubt on that particular kosher, not on that particular kosher certification. Rather, right, they're for particular reasons of spiritual growth and development. They want to limit what they're eating to a very specific type of kosher certification that is from their own community. So there are people who are from the Chabad community, and they feel that they are going to use the kosher certifications that are a product and a result of their own community, which reflect a particular certain style, method, way of life, and it contributes to their own spiritual growth. It's not a statement that others are not as good. They can be equally as good. It's just a statement of I'm Chabad. I like to use Chabad certification for whatever that means. There are other communities who do the same thing, right? I don't know how it works in Satmar, but there are certain communities where they say, you know what, we only use our rabbinical kosher certification because it's a reflection of our life, our community, and so on. But back to the question that we are facing. If we're saying the majority of people who kosher slaughter do it correctly, that is by definition saying that there's a minority that does not do it correctly. How could we then say that we are going to rely that this person did it correctly? What is the answer? From a halachic perspective, we absolutely presume people's righteousness. This is important. We're not just presuming their innocence, we're presuming people's righteousness as a kosher slaughterer. Let's go to text number 11. The grandfather of the very famous Rabbi Soloveitchik from Yeshiva University, his grandfather, the famous Beis Halevi, or maybe actually his great-grandfather. Text number 11, who are we up to? Maybe Mitchell? Or did you just, right, Mitchell, go for it.
Individual judgment, Rabbi Yosef Dov Soloveitchik, Beis Halevi, 2:4. We consider every Jew as certainly righteous. We are certain that they are particular about the laws of kosher, shechita, slaughter, and wouldn't slaughter if they weren't a qualified expert. As a result, we don't see that since there exists a minority of non-experts who slaughter, the animal remains in its established non-kosher status. Among righteous Jews, there is not even a minority that would act improperly. The minority of unrighteous Jews isn't a factor worthy of consideration because every Jew that has not been established as suspect must be considered as undoubtedly righteous. The presumption of righteousness is thus not majority test based. We know that there is an unrighteous minority present in the world at large, but every individual Jew that we are evaluating must be considered as certainly righteous without reservation.
The Beis Halevi said something here that is so incredibly beautiful. He said, normally, when you look at a majority and a minority, you say that, okay, there's 85% are righteous and there are 15% who are not righteous. Therefore, you should worry about the 15%. The Beis Hillel says, no, that's not how it works in Judaism. The Jewish perspective on the presumption of righteousness does not even take into account that 15%. It completely ignores it. It's not an issue of 85% yes and 15% no. We're saying no, 100%. If we have no reason to suspect you, then we love you and you're righteous. Now, if the person who was slaughtering, right, was wearing a white robe with a white hood on his head that had 2 eye holes, yeah, we might be a little bit nervous. If the person who was kosher slaughtering that animal was wearing a PETA t-shirt, then we might be a little bit nervous. But if the person who was slaughtering that animal, we just don't know who they are, or whether they were ordained, or whether they have the qualifications, they are 100% viewed as righteous, as if the minority did not exist. So yes, there are bad apples out there, but our presumption of righteousness from the Jewish perspective completely eradicates the minority unless there's a reason to doubt them. Yes, Mitchell.
Once you don't see them wearing tzitzis, would that throw you off?
That's actually a good question, because we're going to discuss a little bit later in the class issues about a kosher slaughterer that maybe are suspicious. But for now, we'll at least focus on clear red flags. All right, so that's case number 1. Case number 1, no idea who the person is. They could be in the minority of people who don't kosher slaughter properly, but we're saying nope, the person is 100% righteous. Let's go to case number 2. In case number 1, there was nothing suspicious about the kosher slaughterer. We just did not know their qualifications. Case number 2 actually deals with a person who is acting suspiciously, yet even though they act suspiciously, we presume righteousness. Sandy, could you please read text number 12?
Yes, the righteous suspect. Witnesses saw a person enter another house and leave with items concealed beneath his garments. The possessor of the items claimed that he purchased them, while the owner of the house denies this. The law in this case is that the possessor is not believed. This principle only applies when the homeowner claims that the items in question were on loan, and the possessor claims that they were purchased. But if the homeowner claims that the items were stolen, his accusation is rejected. For we do not presume a person to be a thief without proof.
So this is a truly fascinating case. We have a person who leaves somebody's house and he's holding items under his shirt in a way that looks to the naked eye like he's concealing them. He is accused of theft. And what does the person say? The person says, no, I purchased them. Who do we believe? We believe the person who says that I purchased them, even though they were acting suspicious. Why do we believe them? Jewish law says a person has a presumption not just of being innocent, but of actually being righteous. If you have no proof that he stole it, chas v'shalom, God forbid, can you accuse this person of being a thief? Now, there are many more intricacies in this law. We don't have the time to get every nuance out of it, but at least we can see how the idea of a presumption of righteousness is applied, even in a circumstance where a person is acting suspicious. Suspicious is not enough to remove your presumption of righteousness. There has to be some more evidence that comes into play. So even if the circumstances are highly suspicious, we cannot presume a person to be a thief unless we have clear proof. Yes, Sandy.
But even if the homeowner is saying that the items are stolen,
Doesn't
the homeowner have the proof that those were his items and this person's taking them?
But the person says, I bought them. We have something that's called possession is 9/10 of the law, right? If you want to take something out of my possession, you have to prove that it belongs to you. So here we have the possessor is the one who's holding it, and he says, "What do you mean? I purchased it from you." The other person has to have some type of proof to say that was not the case. And again, how that would work would be an interesting court case. Again, we don't have the time tonight to get into the intricacies of the law and the arguments. But the point that we're trying to demonstrate that at least at first glance, at least at the surface level, even a person who's acting suspiciously will nevertheless be believed and viewed as righteous unless you have proof against him. Just suspicion is not enough to remove a person from their status of being righteous. All right, let's go to case number 3. And if you have a question or comment on what we just said, please feel free to chime in. Otherwise, we go to case number 3. So far we said we give a person a presumption of righteousness when they're unknown. We give a person the presumption of righteousness even when they're acting suspicious. Case number 3, we give the person the presumption of righteousness even when they are incriminating themselves. Right? Even when they're incriminating themselves. What's the background to the case that we're going to discuss today? Imagine a scenario where you are negotiating with someone to acquire a property. There's a house that you like. You are in talks with the owner about purchasing the house. All of a sudden, another person enters into the negotiation, offers more money, steals the property right out from under your right out under your nose. Is this kosher? Is this not kosher? From a Torah perspective, this is called wicked. From a capitalistic perspective, that's just called business and happens all day long, everywhere, all the time. People try to scoop up a deal, an opportunity in front of another person. But from a Jewish perspective, you are absolutely not allowed to do that. If a person is in the middle of negotiations, you cannot come in and undercut that person and scoop up the property. Text number 13, David, please.
13?
Yeah, 13.
Rabbi Gidel attempted to acquire a certain plot of land, but Rabbi Abba preempted him and purchased it. Rabbi Gidel complained about Rabbi Abba's actions to Rabbi Zera, who relayed the complaint to Rabbi Yitzhak Nafcha. Rabbi Yitzhak Nafcha told him to wait until Rabbi Abba would visit him for the festival, at which point he would discuss the matter with him. When Rabbi Abba arrived, Rabbi Yitzhak Nafcha asked him, "What is the law in a case where a pauper moves to acquire an ownerless loaf of bread that he found, but someone comes along and preempts him?" Rabbi Abba replied, "The one who took it away is referred to as wicked." Rabbi Yitzhak Nafcha pressed Rabbi Abba, "If so, why did you act in this way?" Rabbi Abba replied, "I did not know that Rabbi Gidel was trying to acquire the land."
So here we have the precedent from the Talmud that if a person is in the middle of trying to conclude a business deal, you are prohibited from preempting that person and doing the business deal on your own. So now let's apply this principle to the actual real estate agent. Imagine you're looking at a house and the real estate agent is helping you and negotiating and working on the details of the house. And all of a sudden you come by the house and the house is sold. Right? The house is absolutely sold. Who is the house sold to? Your real estate agent. Imagine how you would feel. You appointed your real estate agent to negotiate on your behalf, and they purchased the house for themselves. Let's go to text number 14, a beautiful commentary called the Ran. All right, Mitchell, text number 14.
14.
Yep. Page 183.
Glasses. Righteous in spite. A person appointed someone to serve as an agent to purchase a specific property His agent purchased the property without specifying in the purchase agreement that he was doing so on behalf of the principal. And he now claims to have purchased it for himself in personal capacity. The law is that we reject the agent's claim on the grounds that the Constitution 59A labels such an action as deceitful conduct. And we operate under this assumption that the remnant of Israel will not commit injustice.
But this again is another phenomenal case where the real estate agent purchased a piece of property. On this purchase and sale agreement, it does not say anywhere the person who had hired him to purchase the land, and he says, I purchased it for myself. Jewish law says, we don't believe you. Why? Because no Jew would do something so horrible. No Jew would do something so criminal. Even though the person admits it, the person is admitting to buying it for themselves when they are not allowed to and not for the agent, we say too bad. We dismiss the words that you say, we dismiss the action that you did, and we view you as completely righteous. A Jew is completely righteous, and a Jew would faithfully follow the instructions of their employer and purchase the item for their employer. So here we see a circumstance where the person admits that they actually did something against the law, and we say, sorry, I don't believe you. The presumption of righteousness is so strong, even if one claims to have done wrong, we disregard the claim and consider him or her to have acted righteously.
Are you still saying, are you saying that he still now is presumed to have bought for the agent that he said he was buying for?
Yep.
An agent?
That we are presuming that he follows his instructions to the T. In other words, we view his original act as being righteous. The fact that now he's going to court and saying something that's not righteous, that places him as a person who's suspect now, but not what he did yesterday. What he did yesterday, he did as a person who has all of the status of a righteous person. So therefore, as a righteous person, certainly he followed the instructions of his employers. The fact that now, today, he's saying something that's not righteous, okay, so that affects him today. It does not affect what he did yesterday. So the presumption of righteousness is so strong, we disregard what he says today, because yesterday he was definitely righteous. Now, for the future, you may not want to use this person as an agent, that's for sure. But regarding the past, righteousness for sure. All right, let's go to case number 4. All right, this case might blow your mind. When it comes to a person who is a kosher slaughterer, a shochet, what would be the minimum standard that you would utilize to allow the person to do kosher slaughtering, to be the shochet? That if the person did not meet the standard, you would think, throw the bum out, no way you could rely on the person. Any thoughts on what that standard might be? Would you trust a kosher slaughterer who, yes, Mitchell?
Assuming, would you trust somebody who was non-observant, did not have any sense of anything about religion, and he just wants to slaughter animals?
Well, let's narrow it down to who doesn't keep kosher. Would you trust a shochet who does not keep kosher? You would think the most basic fundamental principle is not just the laws, but not just knowing how to do it, but if a person does not keep kosher, how could you trust the person? Let's go to text number 16. Sandy, please, text number 16. We move to page, there's actually one of the bonus texts here in the back. On page 189, in the appendix, text number 16, page 189.
Okay, choosing the better option. A person that isn't particular about the laws of kosher foods and willfully eats non-kosher meat can still be trusted to slaughter an animal properly, so long as the slaughtering knife was examined and confirmed to be perfectly suitable for use. In this case, the person has the option to slaughter the animal properly or to slaughter the animal improperly. We assume that the slaughterer would not choose to intentionally slaughter improperly if he can also do it properly. It is nevertheless necessary to examine the knife beforehand because we don't trust someone unscrupulous about the kosher laws to make the effort of guaranteeing that the blade is fit for use.
First of all, I just want to clarify that there's no reputable kosher certification agency that would hire a person as a shochet who does not keep kosher. So that's never going to happen. However, at least in theory, if a person who was trained as a shochet learned all the laws and has mastered all the techniques, but for whatever reason in their own personal private life prefers the cheeseburger to the kosher burger at Deli on Crown on Sundays, and they were kosher slaughtering the animal in front of a rabbi, and the rabbi checked the knife, it would still be kosher. Why? Because a person has a presumption of righteousness, that in this act that they are doing right now, there would be no gain, there would be no benefit for not doing it properly. They know how to do it properly, they can do it properly, therefore we're going to give them the presumption of righteousness, even though they don't even keep kosher, and we will say that it's kosher. Yes, Mitchell?
The person was not Jewish, but trained to be able to slaughter properly. Could you use that person?
I do not believe so. That a person who is not Jewish cannot kosher slaughter an animal. And as I mentioned before, no kosher agency will ever hire such a person. It makes no sense on any level. But if a circumstances arrived where the person that was in front of you was a trained expert shochet, however, at this day and time is not a person who keeps kosher, as long as the rabbi who supervises is there and is supervising, we will say that it is still kosher, even though the person has done wrong in the past. We believe every person at their core has a pure, holy, divine neshama, and right now and at this moment will not violate the laws of shechita when he certainly has the ability to follow them. So what have we discussed and established today? Jewish values tell us that people are essentially good, right? If not the term good, at least godly and have a pure soul. Because of the fact that at our core, we have that divine and pure soul, therefore we will view you in that way from a legal perspective, unless we have reason to say different. We don't know who the shochet is, no idea, no problem. It's kosher, right? Presumption of righteousness. A person is acting and behaving in a suspicious manner. He took something from someone's house, he's holding it underneath his shirt, his coat, but there's no proof that he stole it. We give the person a presumption of righteousness. Certainly he bought it and purchased it. The agent, your agent, says they acted on their own behalf to buy the property for themselves. We don't believe him today. And we say rather at the time that he did the sale, he was certainly righteous and he did it for his employer. A kosher slaughterer who does not even keep kosher themselves, nevertheless, we're going to say right now in front of our eyes, he'll do it right. Why? Presumption of righteousness, the person has a Jewish soul. So these are real laws that are based on this value, the value that people are righteous, the belief that people are inherently and essentially good. And you know what? Studies have actually shown that people are much better than we give them credit for. Text number 15. David, please. We go back a few pages here to text number 15.
Researchers planted 17,303 wallets in 355 cities on every continent except Antarctica. The American segment, conducted in 2015, involved 25 cities, including Albuquerque, Chicago, Memphis, and New York. The wallets, transparent business card cases with contents instantly visible, contained 3 business cards with male names common to that country. Dmitry Ivanov for Russia, Tono Hendrianta for Indonesia, Peter Kihiga for Kenya. The American names were Brad O'Brien, Brett Miller, or Connor Baker. Each business card listed an email address and identified the man as a freelance software engineer, so people wouldn't try contacting employers. Each wallet also contained a key and a handwritten grocery list in the native language: milk or a locally analogous drink, bread, pasta or rice or noodles, bananas. Some wallets had no money inside. Some had $13.45 in local currency adjusted to a comparable value for each country. Then they ran the experiment again in 3 countries, Poland, UK, and the United States, adding big money to wallets containing $94.15.
So this study was done with 17,303 wallets. So we're talking about a very large study with a significant amount of wallets in a very diverse location. Now, what percentage of people do you think would actually return any of these wallets? Do you think that the wallets that had no money in it would be more easily returned? Or the wallets that had $13.45, those were returned more often? Or is it the wallets that had $94.15 were returned more often? In which of these scenarios do you think the person would have just kept the wallet, kept the cash, or kept the wallet even when there's no cash? And what scenarios would they return it? Any thoughts? Now, what is the assumption that you might make about the probability of the wallets being returned? Mitchell.
The assumption would be that they'll return the wallet with no money, because you have nothing to gain by it, and you keep the wallet with more money or less money.
That, I think, is a very safe assumption, that the more money there is in the wallet, the more people would be tempted to keep it and put it in their pocket and be able to utilize it for themselves. The less money in it is they would return it. However, that is in fact not the case. Do we have a slide over here? Okay. People are generally more righteous and moral than we tend to give them credit. On page 186, you have the honesty rate, and you will see that in all of these scenarios, the more money that was in the wallet, the more often it was returned. Even the one that had less money was still returned more often than the one that had little money. You know why people did it? Because people are more honest than we give them credit for. Yes, sometimes people are selfish. Life is not always easy. People have different backgrounds, circumstances, and challenges that might result in people acting or behaving in a way that is selfish. But the true reality is people are essentially good. Give them a chance, give them an opportunity to show it, to demonstrate it, and they will prove it, that we are created in the image of God, we have a divine soul, and that we are essentially good. So Judaism teaches that people are inherently divine and righteous, and there's such a beautiful message that we have to love our fellow as ourselves. We have to judge them exactly in the same way that we judge ourselves. Just as we view ourselves as being righteous, maybe not perfect, we may have a few flaws, but as a whole, we're good, we're righteous, we're wonderful. View other people that way too. They make mistakes, but that's a minority. That's not really who they are. They're wonderful, they're righteous too, sometimes a little bit flawed. When we behave in that way, first of all, we're told, one that judges his fellow favorably is judged favorably by God. And we certainly would love for God to look at us that way. Judge other people favorably, then we will be judged favorably. But perhaps more importantly, when we view other people favorably, we will treat each other favorably. When we treat each other favorably, the result is going to be a better world for everyone. And that is how we create a world that is actually ready for the coming of Mashiach, where we will not just have a presumption of righteousness, we will actually act out and live to the fullest extent our righteousness. is this gonna work? I don't know why, but videos have stopped working through the PowerPoint. So I'm stopping to share the screen, and I'm going to play the video and then share the screen in a moment.
Lessons.
And you'll have it. So hold on just a second. All right, is that it? No, that was not what I wanted to do. I'll try this again. Hold on a minute. I'll get it to work.
Lesson 6.
All right, that's what I wanted to do. Let's share the screen. Video.
Beyond presumption of innocence. 1. We have a natural tendency to judge ourselves favorably, a courtesy we typically fail to extend to others. Jewish values train us to extend our personal positive bias to others. 2. Judaism views all humans as essentially good by nature, on account of the pure divine soul we possess. Negative conduct is viewed as a foreign imposition on our basic nature. 3. Jewish law views individuals as righteous unless clearly proven otherwise. Unknown people are afforded more than the benefit of the doubt due to a lack of evidence. They are treated as certainly righteous based on the positive nature native to all humans. 4. In certain cases, Jewish law refuses to accept a person's own claim that they acted unethically, due to the underlying presumption of righteousness. 5. Behavioral studies demonstrate that people are typically more virtuous than we assume. 6. Judaism teaches us not to judge people based on statistics or beliefs regarding the broader public, but to assess others with a favorable eye based on their individual merits.
Okay, we're going to get back to this PowerPoint here. Okay. Where's that coming? There we go. Okay. So we'll play that video in a second. So if you'd like to continue learning on the topic of tonight's class, go to myjlight.com/beyondright for lectures, videos, articles, the PowerPoint there on the theme of tonight's class. The 3 JLI classes for next year, the new course that is going to be in the fall is called My God, Defining the Divine. Everything that you wanted to know about God, what does Judaism teach about God, the nature of God, the importance of God, that is going to be in the fall course. The winter course is called Booksmart, course through Judaism's most important titles and authors who inscribed them. So throughout Jewish history, there have been a series of books that have been authored, biblical and rabbinic, that play a major role in Jewish life. We're going to explore what are those books, who wrote them, who are the people behind them, and why should those books be so important to us today. And finally, the spring course, Supernatural, astrology, superstition, and the paranormal in Jewish belief. And Mitchell Spector is going to be my co-presenter in this course as an expert astrologer and expert of the paranormal. You'll be my co-presenter, yes? All right. So these are the 3 courses that you have to look forward to next year. And we're going to conclude with a short clip of a video of the Rebbe sharing some of the ideas that were addressed in the course.
Und befragt noch, wie der Posig war worden, das gleich noch dem. Als Mars Bullen bis die Sache ist verbunden mit gleich, wie die Werte verstehen noch dem. Wie Socher, die Holecho, als auf jeder Linie, was tut in Mischel, verlässt sich nicht auf die eigene Betrachtung. Nur fragt täglich, was sagt Teile, sie die seine Bestimmungen und seine Geme Heil und Heul. Es entrufen die doch Hass für Scholem, Keninen von Asoges Gewul und Hass für Scholem, Adini, was nicht verbunden mit Jescher. Und Jescher, wie Teile erklärt, was Jescher heißt. Also darf sein, Jescher, Bender, der Kivo Odom, als nicht nur der weiße Geist hat der Ewigste mit der Maske, nur sehr täglich, als die Menschen herum sein nicht Masken, als ein Handhoge, sein Hoge Geschorre, als Jescher dicke Handhoge, und unter dem ist mir sicher, wie der Postik es gesagt hat, nicht nur das Machtwollen bis es Echo, in der Loschen in dem gemeint hat, dass es an uns sagt, doch dass es echt eine Haftoche, die Teile sagt zu Zwollen. Und jeder, was gehört zu dem Mixeya, was ist ein Businessman oder ein Businesslady, als sie wollen haben Simcha in sehr Business und sehr Asoken. Das war was sie haben in Pashtus, weil sie haben die Maximum, was sie können sein. In Profit, in Hasloch, in Wochen, was sie zusammen damit mit dem Minimum, was sie kann sein, dabei Anstrengung und das mit Bechlal und nicht auch kein Agmas Nefesh dabei, beim hat Simcha Amitis und hat die Sicherheit in dem. Also sie wird sein beim Echet weiter, wie war das, wie Koomo, steht das in den Heimschach. Als und seine Bewegungen, sein tagtäglichen Leben ist in vollen Einstimmung, vollen Einklang mit den Sochers Anweisungen, mit der Anweisung von Tero. Und das gewähnt die Mexia, die sagt, mit welcher die Socher sich verbunden mit Lernen. Tero, und befragt durch das, was jeder von uns will. Nimmt ihn drauf, echt Einteil durch das, was halt ist. Die alle Erde, die alle Meses, in welchen wir lernen mit jüdischen Kindern Teile. Und wir lernen Teile mit jüdischen Erwachsenen Jiden. Und nachher, wie artig hat jeder Businessman, hat sich echt jeder Tag, ein Kolponim, eine kurze Weile, welcher magisch, macht das heilig in sein Leben, durch was damals lernt der Tero, und wir schaßen noch da, ein freierer Tag, und das ist der Tag von Shabbos, oder Yontif, oder Rosh Hashanah, oder Bechlal Tshuva-Tag, weil damals geht noch mehr dazu, in seines Manni, was geht ab zu Tero, und unter dem wird nicht nur durch fällt nicht bei ihm. In sein Herzloch, in seiner Zeit, was geht ab in seinem Business, der Adrabe, durch was nimmt ab noch etliche Minuten. Auf Tero lernen kommt beim zu etliche Choice von Herzloch in seinem Businessleben und in seinem Business. Asokim und sein in der Hatzloche von seinem Business, was der Fall bringt das bei ihm, so ein Simcha Gedele.
So the Rebbe there emphasizing how honesty and integrity in business, right, from a Torah perspective, right, that is the way to achieve true success in every level and every measure. And that from a Torah perspective, we don't just do what's right, we do what is beyond right. We go even more than that. This concludes our 6-week course. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. I found it incredibly fascinating, incredibly relevant, and incredibly challenging to see how some of these beautiful Jewish ideas are applied in law. So thank you again for coming. Tomorrow night, Thursday night at 7:30 p.m., we will have our weekly 30 minutes of Torah study, class based on the weekly Torah portion, same Zoom link, Shul Zoom room, and I hope to see many of you there, and I hope we'll have many more opportunities to learn together. So thank you so much for coming.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
You're very welcome. Bye-bye.
Bye, Mitch.
Bye.